Live-action puppetry is an art form that's rarely used for mainstream cinema nowadays, but it has a charm and magic to it, a tangibility that makes us believe in a physical presence. However, many assume that puppetry is limited to Thunderbirds or Jim Henson's The Muppets and Sesame Street, when really, puppetry is a very broad filmmaking technique that encompasses not just marionette and hand, but also motor mechanics, bodysuit acting, and remote control animatronics. In this show, I will highlight the best and the worst that puppet cinema has to offer, but trying to keep an open mind about what I count as puppetry. Because when it comes down to it, live-action puppetry is the art of bringing an inanimate object to life while a camera rolls. Welcome, one and all, to the world of Puppet Panic. Howdy folks, Jamboree here.
I am King Kong! Come fight me, Godzilla!
When King Kong stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien decided to make a crossover movie about King Kong fighting Frankenstein's monster, he decided to pitch the concept to different studios around the world. Most of them rejected the idea except for Japan's Toho. Unfortunately for O'Brien, they transformed it into the next Godzilla film and didn't give him any credit for the original idea. So even after all of this borderline development hell, how did the film end up being? Let's find out. Godzilla would crush you, Henson. When a pharmaceutical company is struggling to sell goods through television, the eccentric Mr. Tako orders his representatives Osamu and Kinsaburo to kidnap King Kong for them, in a bid to use him for a marketing campaign. Meanwhile, an American submarine has hit an iceberg, which releases the frozen Godzilla from his slumber. Kong ends up escaping from Mr. Tako's boat and starts rampaging through Japan, then comes face to face with Godzilla, who will win in this ultimate rumble. Unlike their respective predecessors, King Kong vs. Godzilla is very cheesy and silly, not really taking its concept too seriously and even throwing in lots of elements of comedy. Knowing this, I was hoping for a fun time, expecting an enjoyable monster romp, but ended up with mixed feelings by the end. First of all, it's slow, really slow. Most of the film is about setting up the fight between Kong and Zilla, with the narrative taking its time to try and get these two together. This is the main reason why people came to watch this movie, but the film is clearly struggling to get the ball rolling. However, there's a decent comical satire on the television industry throughout the film, as director Inshiro Honda wanted to comment on how Japanese television was becoming desperate for ratings. It's funny and profound how the movie contrasts industry greed with the bigger threat of giant monsters, showing how meaningless high ratings are when lives are in danger. Unfortunately, the human story is too lackluster and uninspired to compensate for all the waiting. It's pretty much a homage to the original 1933 King Kong, except this time it's a greedy pharmaceutical company after Kong. The natives who worship Kong are awkwardly played by Japanese actors in blackface. Yeah, which hasn't aged well and made me feel really uncomfortable. If Toho could import Caucasian American actors into the film, there really wasn't any excuse why they couldn't hire black actors to play the natives. Heck, Japan have their own history of indigenous tribes, so the natives could have been based on their own culture. But these natives do get an awesome song to sing to Kong to help him sleep. There's also a fight between Kong and a giant octopus on the natives' island, but limited special effects mean that the battle doesn't get anywhere near as thrilling as it could be. There's only so much they could do with blue-screened real octopi and a man in a fursuit. The movie does suffer from tonal issues too. Yes, it likes to be campy and comical for a lot of scenes, particularly with Mr. Tako and his employees, but then suddenly we'll cut to a scene that's supposed to be scary or serious. It's really jarring. Like we're bouncing between two different kinds of monster movies. Most of the human characters are very one note, each one stuck with a single trait. I didn't find many of them to be interesting or likable. I couldn't care less if Mr. Tarko's employees lost their jobs because the film never gives us any reasons to empathize with them. Osamu's sister Fumiko is limited to the role of damsel in distress for most of the film, and her boyfriend is as plain as cardboard. The only character that I enjoyed watching was Mr. Tarko. He provides the biggest laughs in the film with his bumbling antics.
これを押すとキングコングはパーですよ。パー？毎日の用心にね、イカダに TNT 火薬を仕掛けてあるんですよ。
I loved his passion for this marketing campaign sponsored by Kong and how he became crazier and crazier as the film went along. He's like a really campy J. Jonah Jameson from Spider-Man, except he wants King Kong instead of Spider-Man photos.
ラジオ、テレビ、週刊誌、みんなゴジラゴジラゴジラゴジラ。これじゃまるでセントラル製薬ブームじゃないか。映画もです。
食堂でもゴジラ焼きってのが出てます。
バカ！莫大なる宣伝費をかけた巨大なるマシンがどうしたの？まだお見えになりません。電報を打て、電報！
Even once Kong and Zilla arrive on land, their rampages are far from inspired. It's more of the same things you would expect. From smashing buildings to picking up trains, with the action often interrupted by boring scenes of military meetings in which the army once again discuss how they'll stop the monsters. After an hour into the film, the two monsters finally duke it out, but their first fight is incredibly brief, with Kong being too outmatched by the radioactive-powered Godzilla. So the big ape just walks away? This is followed by a long homage to the iconic scene where Kong grabs Andaro and climbs a tower, minus all the investment needed. Time that could have been used for the actual, Godzilla vs King Kong aspect. After that, we finally get a second Godzilla vs Kong fight in the last 10 minutes, and now Kong has a bigger advantage with electricity powers. This final climax is goofy, cheesy, and not as cool as the film's concept sounds, plus there's not much tactical or creative choreography to their fighting. It's more like a free-for-all wrestling match, with the monsters relying on things around them to use as weapons. The bodysuit actors were given free rein when doing these fights, rehearsing all the moves by themselves, and they based the fighting style on professional wrestling, which was starting to get very popular in 60s Japan. I didn't feel like this fight was worth all the wait, but it is the best part of the movie, as there's a silly charm to all the rubber suit action that I found rather funny. Especially when Kong tries ramming a whole tree down poor Godzilla's throat. That was hilarious. Anyway, let's talk about the puppetry for this movie. Seeing as this film is mainly shot in daylight and is the first Godzilla film to be in colour, it is now much harder to forgive the corny costumes, because nothing is being disguised with dark lighting or grey colours anymore. The cheapness is finally exposed. The suit actors don't really seem to be taking the puppeteering very seriously, playing their characters more cartoony than realistic. Which can be entertaining, but it makes it hard for us to believe in the animalistic nature of both monsters. Godzilla's bodysuit puppet is decent enough. You can see right through the rubber, but it has an intimidating presence that helps the reptilian creature seem dominating compared to Kong. It's nothing amazing, but a good effort for the third film in the series. While Kong's suit is just... I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. Awful. It looks unconvincingly crude, and close-up shots on his face really show how rubbish it is. Is that paper mache? Oh, and those arms. What the hell? Apparently they're pole-controlled extensions to help Kong appear more like a gorilla, but they look so awkward, long, and stiff that he looks more like Terry Jones in Monty Python's Meaning of Life.
I wonder where that fish has gone.
You did love it so. You looked after it like a son.
And it went wherever it didn't go.
The film's special effects artist, Eiji Tsuburaya, was a big fan of King Kong, so he did have high standards for the Kong suit, flat out rejecting a number of attempts made by his crew on the suit. But the final choice that AG went with is still pretty grim looking, even for the time the movie was made. AG originally wanted the monsters to be animated with stop motion, in the vein of Willis O'Brien's animation for the original King Kong, but budgetary reasons stopped that from being an option. There are some stop motion shots in the film, but because the technique is very rarely used, they just come off as jarringly out of nowhere. There's a heavier use of miniature sets this time too, which I found to be wonderfully charming. I couldn't help but smile at how you can really tell that these are all clearly toys. It's adorable. And because the film isn't supposed to be too dark this time, I didn't feel bad for laughing at some of these effects. I especially giggled at Kong holding a doll of Fumiko. That was priceless. To conclude, King Kong vs. Godzilla isn't as awesome as the title sounds. Mr. Tarko is entertainingly funny, keeping the film somewhat alive with his goofy comedy, and the fight scenes, even though they're about 13 minutes of the whole film altogether, are still enjoyable to watch in a silly, campy sort of way. But man, is the film a slog to get through because we're mainly playing the waiting game until Godzilla and King Kong actually verse each other. I've been Jamboree, and I hope that you enjoyed this review. If you did, then feel free to subscribe, like, and share. Also, please consider supporting me by making a monthly pledge to my Patreon in return for awesome rewards. Thank you. So, what am I going to be reviewing in the next episode of Puppet Panic? Well, let's just say the black suits are coming. Cheerio, folks.